The greatest winner of friends the world has ever known never read a book about it. Never gave a speech, never closed a deal, never worried for 1 second about making a good impression. You'll probably meet him tomorrow, coming down the street, and when he gets within 10 feet of you, he'll start to wag his tail. A dog. That's Dale Carnegie's answer to the whole question of how to make people like you. Start with the dog. Because a dog is the one creature that doesn't have to earn its keep. A hen has to lay eggs. A cow has to give milk. A canary has to sing. And a dog gives you nothing but pure, uncomplicated gladness that you exist. It isn't selling you anything. It just likes you, out loud, with its whole body. When Carnegie was 5, his father bought him a little yellow pup for 50 cents. Every afternoon the dog would sit in the yard with his eyes fixed on the path, and the moment he heard the boy's voice coming up the hill, he'd take off like a shot, barking with what Carnegie could only describe as sheer ecstasy. They had 5 years together. Then one night in a storm, lightning killed the dog 10 feet from where the boy was standing. He never forgot what that animal understood without ever being taught. Here's what the dog understood. You can make more friends in 2 months by becoming genuinely interested in other people than you can in 2 years by trying to get other people interested in you. Read that twice, because nearly everyone has it backwards. We spend our lives trying to be interesting, rehearsing the story we'll tell, the impression we'll leave, while the people in front of us are doing exactly the same thing, and only half listening to ours. A telephone company once went through 500 phone calls just to find the single most common word. It was I. We are, every one of us, our own favorite subject. The people who manage to break that habit have a quiet kind of power. Howard Thurston was the most famous magician alive, 40 years on the road, and by his own count 60 million people had bought tickets to watch him. He told Carnegie his secret had nothing to do with the tricks. Plenty of magicians knew the same sleight of hand. The difference was what he did in the wings. Most performers, he said, looked out at the crowd and thought, "Here's a bunch of suckers I'm about to fool." Thurston stood there before every show and told himself over and over, "I love my audience. I love my audience." They never heard a word of it. They felt all of it. Theodore Roosevelt had the same gift, and it reached all the way down to the people everyone else walked past. He knew the names of the White House kitchen staff. Visiting years after he'd left office, he went through the building greeting the maids and cooks by name. And finding Alice from the kitchen, he asked whether she still made cornbread. "She did," she said, "but nobody upstairs ate it anymore. They show bad taste." Roosevelt boomed, "And I'll tell the president so when I see him." The old head usher, 40 years on the job, said with tears in his eyes that it was the happiest day the staff had had in 2 years. That's the first move. Not being interesting. Being interested in everyone, including the people who can do nothing for you. The second move you can make before you've said a word. You smile. Charles Schwab, the man from last episode, paid a fortune for his way with people, said his smile alone had been worth $1 million, and he was probably underselling it. A real smile says the thing everyone is quietly desperate to hear and almost never does. "I'm glad you're here." It's why we love dogs, and why a baby grinning at a stranger in a waiting room can thaw a whole row of irritated adults. Not one of them decided to smile back. They just did. But here's the harder, more useful part. What do you do on the morning you don't feel like smiling at all? A New York stockbroker named William Steinhardt was, by his own cheerful confession, one of the worst grouches on Broadway. 18 years married, and he barely said 24 words to his wife between waking up and walking out the door. Carnegie gave his class an odd assignment: smile at someone deliberately every hour for 1 week. So the next morning Steinhardt looked at his own sour face in the mirror and told it to knock it off. He sat down to breakfast, said "Good morning, my dear," and smiled. His wife wasn't pleased. She was stunned. He kept it up anyway. He smiled at the elevator operator, the doorman, the man in the subway booth, the traders on the floor who'd never once seen his teeth. And a few weeks later, the reformed grouch reported that those 2 months had brought more happiness into his home than the entire previous year. The mechanism is older than Carnegie. The psychologist William James noticed that we get it backwards. We assume the smile follows the feeling that you grin because you're happy. But the two are wired together, and the one you can actually steer is the action. Act cheerful, and more often than not the cheer shows up to meet you. The third move is the simplest, and the one we're laziest about. You remember the person's name? In 1898, in a small town north of New York City, a man named Jim Farley was kicked by a horse and killed, leaving a widow and 3 boys. The eldest, also Jim, was 10, and he went to work in a brickyard. He never got much schooling, but he had one talent worth more than any diploma. He could meet you once, and a year later shake your hand and ask after your family by name. By the end of his life, Jim Farley could call 50,000 people by their first names, and that talent helped put Franklin Roosevelt in the White House, with Farley running the 1932 campaign and going on to sit in the cabinet as Postmaster General. A person's own name, he understood, is to that person the sweetest sound in any language. Andrew Carnegie figured this out as a boy in Scotland, and later made millions with it. He'd caught a rabbit that promptly had a whole litter, and nothing to feed them with. So he made the neighborhood children an offer: gather enough clover and dandelions for the rabbits, and he'd name one of them after each child. They swarmed to it. He never forgot why it worked. Years later, he wanted to sell steel rails to the Pennsylvania Railroad, run by a man named J. Edgar Thompson. So Carnegie built an enormous new mill in Pittsburgh and named it the Edgar Thompson Steel Works. When the railroad needed rails, you can guess whose mill got the order. And when Carnegie and George Pullman were locked in a vicious price war over railway sleeping cars, Carnegie ended it in a single sentence. He proposed they merge. Pullman, suspicious, asked what the new company would be called. "Why," said Carnegie, "the Pullman Palace Car Company, of course." Pullman's face lit up. "Come into my room," he said. "Let's talk it over. And sometimes it's just plain kindness." A salesman named Sid Levy took the trouble to learn to pronounce a customer's name properly, Nicodemus Papadoulos, which everyone else had flattened to Nick. The first time Levy said the whole thing out loud, the man's eyes filled. In 15 years in this country, he said, nobody had ever bothered to call him by his real name. Step back and look at the three together. Be interested, smile, remember the name. Carnegie files them under ways to make people like you. But notice what they actually are. They're fast. All three land in the first few seconds of meeting someone, before you've made a single argument or asked for one thing. Call it the 6-second welcome. And they aren't tricks you bolt onto a stranger. Their last episode's principle made visible. That human hunger to feel important, finally getting fed. A smile, your own name in someone's mouth. The plain sense that they actually want to know about you. That's what appreciation looks like from the outside, in real time. None of it survives being faked. A mechanical grin and a memorized name fool no one for long. But done for real, it costs you almost nothing, and it changes how a person meets you before the conversation has even begun. Which sets up the rarest skill of all. Because there's one way to make a person feel more important than smiling at them, or remembering their name, or asking about their kids, and almost nobody alive can do it. Carnegie once spent an entire dinner being told he was the most fascinating conversationalist in the room. He had barely said a word. Next time, how to win someone over by saying almost nothing.